Hello, everyone. I'm Leah Eisenberg. Have we already had a class together? Yes. Okay. We're just getting the gang back together. As if a 4-hour research ethics class wasn't good enough, they've given us this delightful room with not quite full lighting. So, super. Anyhow, I will try and make it vaguely interesting, but glad to have you. Feel free, as always, to join in with questions, comments, commentary, grievances, because none of us need to hear me for 4 hours solid. I will have some breaks because breaks are nice. And all right. So let's begin by talking about Jesse Gelsinger. Who's heard of Jesse Gelsinger? Anyone? All right, good. Then this is new content. This is ripped from the headlines, although, as you see, not recent headlines, but it's still a case that research ethicists talk a lot about. Jesse Gelsinger, he was 18 years old. He was not sick before he died. He suffered from a disease I'm probably going to butcher, ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency, which is a rare metabolic disorder. But he was able to control it by taking a variety of medications and also being on a low-protein diet. He knew when he signed up for the experiment at the University of Pennsylvania that he would not benefit. The test was to study the safety of a treatment for babies with a fatal form of his disorder. Still, it offered hope, the promise that someday Jesse might be rid of the cumbersome medications and diet that was so restrictive that half a hot dog was a treat for him. So what's the worst that can happen, he told a friend. So, spoiler alert, we're talking about research ethics. What do you think the worst that could happen is? Death. That indeed happened. So the therapy in this study was an infusion of corrective genes encased in a dose of weakened cold virus, which was serving as a vector. The vector of the adenovirus was to get the corrective genes into his genes. The Penn researchers had tested their vector at the same dose Jesse got in mice, monkeys, baboons, and one human patient, and they see sort of things they expected, flu-like side effects, some liver inflammation that all, was self-limited, resolved on its own. When Jesse got the vector, he suffered a chain reaction that the testing had not predicted. He had jaundice, a blood clotting disorder, which progressed to multi-organ failure and brain death. Any concerns about this research? So it seems like Jesse, why do you think he was recruited for this research? Come on, we know. Why are researchers interested in Jesse? He has this weird rare disease. I probably should not call it weird. He has a rare disease. Unusual. And so in order to study rare diseases, we need people with rare diseases. So they talked to him about it. In order to enroll in research, what does the subject need to know? Side effects, risks, benefits. What's going to be involved in this research? Granted, I'm not telling you very much, but do you think that he knew that? I see both yes and no. Does anyone want to embellish on why they're saying yes or no?
The fact that he said, "What's the worst thing that can happen to me?" to somebody, indicates that he probably didn't know that.
Okay. Because that makes it sound like, no, I might get a tickly throat, weirdness, whatever. Yeah. Other thoughts?
But it said that they had not predicted those things.
Right.
They may not have even put those in there as risk.
What did he expect to get out of this?
Nothing.
Nothing. So he at least knew it was experimental, was for research purposes. Who has concerns about this? Well, you said, the fact that he said, what's the worst that can happen suggests he doesn't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
He just didn't know his expert was that.
Yeah. Anyone think he was well informed? Hard to say. Was this an unethical project from what we know so far? Of course you don't. That's part of the fun. But from what you know so far, I will repeat the comment, which I've already not been doing. Someone said we don't have enough information, which is absolutely true. This is just a tiny bit of information. We know that he didn't expect it to be therapeutic for himself, so someone told him at least something about it. But he also said, well, what's the worst that could happen, which makes it sound like he didn't expect very severe side effects. But we also see that did the researchers have reason to believe that it worked? Did they just come up with this last week and like, seems cool, whatever? No, they've already tested it on, they've done some animal models. They didn't notice big problems. So it depends on what the consent was like, but it looks like they were taking sort of normal steps. Of course, the more to the story is that it was found after Jesse died that this study was not straightforward and clear at all, that there was several animal deaths in the preclinical studies. They were reported to the NIH but did not appear on the final consent form. That human volunteers had already suffered some severe adverse events. No one had died yet, but Jesse was not told that people have been getting really, really sick from this. And the study's lead researcher didn't disclose that he had a financial interest in the company conducting the clinical trial. Do you have concerns now about how the trial was run? Yes. Spoiler alert, your answer should be yes, I do. I have terrible concerns. Because it's one thing, is every death in a research study mean that the research is unethical? No. Why not? Pardon?
If humans die, I mean, that seems to be an outcome.
Right. Sometimes people die. Also, what are we doing? We're trying to figure out more about an experimental agent. If we knew everything it did, we wouldn't need to be doing research about it. So that's part of the issue. However, in this case, we also see that information was being withheld. So that's different than, oh, something unforeseen happened, but we couldn't predict it. Here, something unforeseen happened, and it was maybe predictable. That's sort of the difference. At IRB, we always look at adverse events, and we say, number one, is it related to the research, and number two, could we have predicted it? Here, they could have predicted it, and they still didn't report it. It wasn't given to Jesse. Do you think? Now we can look at it and say, well, no matter what the consent was like, we know it was not full, because things like animal deaths, sick human volunteers were not reported. So even if he made the decision using the best information he had, he didn't have all of the information. He didn't have information that was really material to his decision. So this was a big scandal. This shut down Johns Hopkins research for a while. It's still a case we talk about because along the way so many steps went poorly. And that's what we're going to talk about today and what we talked about last time, is it can be challenging, especially when you're one piece of a big research project, to stand up and say, look, something is really not going well, or something has not been reported properly. But everyone involved, everyone who has information about potential research violations, have an obligation to talk about it. Because you think there was someone else here in this study who knew that things had gone wrong and were not on the consent form. But it was not told, and look at the repercussions it had. So the 20th century in research ethics regulation is unfortunately 100 years of reactive regulation. Very few times that people say, you know what, I have this new research I want to do, and before I do it, I'd like to make sure everything's above board and that we're treating humans as nicely as possible. It's mostly just, oh my goodness, something has gone terribly wrong. We should make a rule about that. So when you look back at the 20th century, what is the big event that you think caused people to notice that we needed research regulation? I'm giving you a big clue. So go ahead and shout it out. Come on, people know. What happened in the 20th century that made us notice that research should be regulated and not just allow people to do whatever they darn well please? The Holocaust. What kind of research was done then? In general, huh? I'm sorry, say it louder, shout it out. Human research. What kind of human research? Excellent human research that we draw upon for its good quality findings. Tyrannical human research. Research that was not based in science, that did not treat human subjects as people with thoughts and feelings and right, didn't treat them as people who had the right to make decisions about their own bodies. So when this all came out, it caused sort of the whole world to go, oh my goodness, we need to do something so this doesn't happen again. So following the trials at Nuremberg, what came out was the Nuremberg Code, and this was sort of the first worldwide set of regulations about research ethics. And so there's 10 principles from Nuremberg, and hopefully these sound to you overly simplistic and like something you shouldn't need to tell people. But of course, what we learned from the Holocaust is that you do need to tell people this. Number one, voluntary consent. People who were subject to the research, which was not really research, during World War II were not volunteers. They were basically forced into being human subjects. It has to yield fruitful results. This doesn't mean that you have to know what the results are going to be ahead of time, but you have to have some knowledge that it's going to lead to fruitful results. It can't just be like, I thought of this last night and I'm going to do it. So part of that is there need to be prior animal studies. You can't start your research idea by trying it on humans. Avoid unnecessary physical and mental suffering. Again, sometimes being part of research, just like having a medical test, is uncomfortable. That doesn't mean that every time a patient has discomfort that you have violated this, but it means if you know something's going to be painful, that you have warned the subject, that you have given them proper pain medication, that you have taken steps to minimize any painful testing. No experiments, I always think this is interesting, no experiments for which there is reason to believe death or disabling injury will occur unless the experimental subjects are physicians, or the experimental physicians are subjects, which is pretty much like, okay, if you think that's going to work, and there's a chance of death, you go ahead, you do it yourself. What do you think of that? I'm always a little bit torn, because on the one hand, if you think there's a good chance of this causing death, it's maybe something none of us should be taking part in. On the other hand, if you have an idea, go ahead. What do you think? Is that something we should be encouraging experimental physicians to do? People are unsure. I'm a little unsure. Because, adults can make their own choices, but as a sort of research regulating body, that seems to be a weird rule to me. Risk should not exceed potential promise. If you think this might change the duration of the common cold from 10 days to 9, but there is a good chance your left arm will fall off. That is maybe not a risk that is exceeding the potential promise. Proper preparations should be made to protect against remote chances of injury or death. Conducted by scientifically qualified persons, something else that didn't happen during World War II. Volunteers can withdraw at any time. That's part of being a volunteer. And the primary investigator must be prepared to terminate the experiment for health and safety reasons. So again, this is sort of groundbreaking. Like, we're going to get together, we're going to talk about some good rules, but hopefully at this point, if I said, hey everyone, I'm here to instruct you about research, and I want to tell you, you should only research on humans that have volunteered. hopefully you would think like, oh, for Pete's sake, this is even dumber than I thought. But, again, sometimes you have to say things because apparently some people need to be told. So does Nuremberg solve research ethics concerns? After Nuremberg came out, there's a number of researchers, particularly in the United States, who said, you know what, Nuremberg has gone a little bit too far. That this was a big response to a terrible atrocity, but now it's keeping us from doing our research. So Joseph Gardella, who is the dean of students at Harvard Medical School, put out this famous letter, and he basically said, this is overreaction for what we need in the United States. He felt that it constrained research, especially where it came to persons who couldn't consent for themselves. Not that he felt they shouldn't, no consent should be given, but that a surrogate should be able to consent for them. That he felt, well, if we can't research on people with dementia or children, we're not going to learn things about them. So we should be able to research on them if sort of their parent or their next of kin give consent for them. What do you think? People are unsure. So anyhow, so what came from that is the Declaration of Helsinki. This is still something that we follow, the World Health Organization. It was adopted in 1964, but they're still voting on it now. In the 2013 was the last vote. So again, potential benefits must outweigh the risks. We have to be able to manage our risks. But here you can notice, again, we say participants need to be volunteers, informed, respected. We respect them by maintaining their privacy. Part of how we respect them is giving them information. But the difference between Helsinki and the Nuremberg principles is that here you can obtain consent from a legal guardian. So this is kind of what Dr. Gardella had been saying, like, you don't need to go so far for us. We are no better than that. But at the same time, in the United States, there's still a lot of research going on about children, prisoners, mental patients, poor minorities. So we'll learn in a minute, although he was saying, look, the United States does not need that drastic of a set of rules. That was not totally correct. Also, if you are interested in reading a delightful comic about the terrible history of human experimentation, I do really suggest this history of human guinea pigs. You can find it on the nib.com. I have a few more slides from it, but who doesn't love a comic about human experimentation? It's good fun. Next we hear from Henry K. Beecher. He published in 1966. The years are going by and we're still fighting this. A list of 22 ethically problematic research trials. They're ethically problematic and they have been published in big medical journals. Things such as injecting cancer cells into elderly patients who had not given consent. There's a very famous experiment involving exposing institutionalized children to hepatitis. An interesting point about that experiment, which I always forget the name of, it is something like Milbank, is that the parents consented to this. It was an institution for children with developmental delays. And they had something like a 93% rate of hepatitis. And so he said to some parents, like, they're probably going to get it anyway. Can I just infect them so I could test this? And they were like, sure. We'll find it. So do you think that's ethical? There was consent. Consent was given. What do you think? Cool? Good? Why not?
The risk outweighs the benefit.
True. I mean, yeah, that's true. The risk outweighs the benefit. Because he would say, well, they're probably going to get hepatitis anyway. What would you say to that? Say it again?
My kid probably can't come.
That might be, you might have thought like, oh, if I don't enroll them, maybe they won't be allowed to go to the institution. I want them to because there's not a lot for children with developmental delay in 1966.
Where was
Because
that?
it wasn't based on, like, they didn't but it doesn't sound like they did. It was based on
a reason for thinking his treatment would work. But part of the issue here is that it's true most of the children would get hepatitis. Was it true every child was going to get hepatitis? No. And we'll talk moving forward about the difference between some risk and, or about allowing people to consent to things that are not reasonable. It's not reasonable to say to someone like, let me infect your child with hepatitis. Even if someone agrees, that's something we don't allow now, because we also have obligations as researchers to have research that is not unduly harmful. It's unduly harmful to say, like, we'll just inject you with a thing, whatever. No therapy control groups in serious treatable diseases. We'll hear more about that in a moment also. And so he said, again, here we are, 1966, another wave of someone coming up and saying, look, and this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, we need more research regulation. So everyone, when you go back to your lab, you're like, oh, the regs are so annoying. This is part of why we have regulations. Someone injecting disabled children with hepatitis to make his own research easier. So he said, again, we need informed consent. We need benefits to measure it with risk. You were talking about that. And we need intelligent, informed, compassionate, and responsible investigators. You know, compassionate, informed investigators should not say, here, I have this great idea. It involves giving disabled children hepatitis. Like, no, that's a terrible idea. Plus, there is plenty of children there with hepatitis already. Part of it was just, he's like, well, it'll be easier if everyone has hepatitis. So now we're going to talk about Tuskegee, the next in our century of terrible research. Who's familiar with the Tuskegee study? Okay, a couple people. We're about to learn more about it. So in 1932, remember that, in 1932, the Tuskegee study began. It was initially involved 600 black men, just about 400 with syphilis and 200 without the disease. The purpose of the study was to look at the natural course of untreated syphilis. You know, does it look different in a black person versus a Caucasian person? So started in 1932. This happened in Macon County, Alabama, one of the poorest counties in the entire United States. So imagine that you are someone who is maybe not very educated, don't have a lot of health care. It's 1932, and you get this letter on official letterhead from your county health department. And part of what it says is, some time ago you were given a thorough examination, and since that time, we hope you have gotten a great deal of treatment for bad blood. You will now be given your last chance to get a second examination. This examination is a very special one, and after it is finished, you'll be given a special treatment if it is believed you are in a condition to stand it. Then there's details, and then at the bottom, note all caps. Remember, this is your last chance for special free treatment. Be sure to meet the nurse. So if you receive this in the mail, what would your reaction be? Someone says her reaction be, I have to go. Why would you think that?
It's your last chance.
Last chance, in all caps. Free. It's special treatment, special exam, special treatment.
And I have bad blood.
Bad blood, you're sick with something. From the health department, I would find this extremely alarming. I might find it alarming now, and part of my job is being a crank about things. You know, be like, you are sick, and this is your last chance. So I think that's alarming generally. If you're also someone who, a lot of the men who took part in this study, they did it because it was a way to access health care. They were picked up, they were given free lunch, they were given what they thought was just sort of routine health screenings, and then this comes. Do you think this makes it look like it's up to you whether you want to take part or not? No, it seems very alarming. I have to go. So again, they were never told they had syphilis. They were subjected to a number of tests, including some invasive and unpleasant tests like spinal taps. So it started in 1932. Penicillin, standard of care, was available by the 1940s. First for military use, and after that for prescription for everyone. How long did this study go on? 40 years. 40 years, including about 30 of those years after we had a standard of care treatment. So what were the ethical problems with this study? Yes.
There's injustices on part of the participants or the people involved because there's already a cure.
Right. So it was injustice because there was a standard of care, there was a cure. Something we don't allow in research now is to withhold standard of care. What else? Were these?
Government saying like, that the government itself was doing this, right? I mean,
It started with the county health department, yeah.
and how you trust them? The government itself is not just one particular institute or person.
So the comment is, how do you trust the government then if this came from this? And this now in 2018 is still a problem. It's still a problem that minority communities are very distrustful of being in research, and this is part of it. So I think it's very smart that you hit upon that. How can you trust when this has gone on for 40 years? And not that long ago either. What else? Was there, how about the study design? How was the consent process?
There wasn't one.
There was sort of one.
Not much of one.
So what was the problem with the consent process?
Coercive.
It was coercive, for sure. What else? What do we talked about before? What does the consent need to include? Pardon?
Free stuff.
Free stuff.
Well, like a sanitation.
Well, so that might have been part of why it was coercive, is it contained the free stuff. Do these people know what their diagnosis was?
No.
No. Did they? If you don't know what your diagnosis is, can you know what the standard of care is?
No.
No. Do they know the risks of taking part? No. None of that. Just come with us. We're going to do the best we can for you. What surprises you about this? And do you think, what do you think helped it proceed in this way for so long?
Because there wasn't anybody to educate them about what their rights were, kind of.
There's no one to educate them. Yeah, what about the study population? What do we know about them?
It was just African Americans.
African Americans, not only, but in one of the poorest counties in the country. So you think they, didn't have access to things like free health screenings, transportation, lunch, a way to research what acceptable care was, a knowledge of how research should usually run.
And they also didn't have access to healthcare providers that cared for their health.
Right, they didn't have healthcare providers that's job was to care for them. Right. Another thing that helped us go out a long time is the leadership of this research was not consistent. It changed a lot. The sort of study staff didn't really know, after a while lost track of what the purpose was. There was not consistency, so that made it easier too. If there's always sort of a new person in charge every couple of years, it's harder to say like, oh, I've been on this study for 15 years and I'm really concerned about the way we're treating our subjects. It was just sort of always someone new, not quite sure what's happening. Other thoughts? So that's another thing people often look back to in terms of here, this was after we heard from Dr. Gardella and Dr. Beecher about how research ethics is not going great in the United States. First from Dr. Gardella about how we don't need as much regulation because we're not barbarians like people in World War II. And then after that, there was this expose of all the ways that the United States research was not going well, and this still continued for years after that. So this gave rise to the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. Rolls right off the tongue. This met from 1974 to 1978, so just in the wake of when everything about Tuskegee really came out. This was viewed as the first National Bioethics Commission, and this was the point where people got together and said, okay, look, the United States needs some federal regulations about research, because we're still having a lot of problems with running our research in a normal human way. We need a Department of Health and Human Services office to protect human subjects in research. We need to have regular updates from PIs. That's part of what didn't happen in Tuskegee. You know, you think hopefully if we were hearing from the PI regularly that someone would have picked up on, like, what on earth are you doing over there? That is not good research. Need for protection of vulnerable populations, and need for negative consequences to befall those who are guilty of misconduct. If you keep doing these terrible research studies, that's it. You don't get to be in charge anymore. So they put out the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report is still very much a report we turn to and look to, teach my medical students about, and so it put out a variety of principles and applications, and you can get this free online if after you read my bio for fun, you would like to read the Belmont Report. The Belmont Report's much better to read than my bio. I'm not that interested. So it defines differences among therapeutic practices, innovative use of therapy, and research. And so what the differences are, which I'll talk again about going forward, is therapeutic practice is this has science behind it. This is how I treat most of my patients. This is how I treat you. You've come in with strep. I've tested you for strep. I'm going to give you this antibiotic for strep. That's our therapeutic practice. There's science behind it. It's how we treat most everyone. Innovative use of therapy, experimentations. You've come in and your strep is not responsive to standard of care. I'm going to try something else. It doesn't really have science. There's not proven, link that this will cure you, but I have some reason to believe. I'm just going to try it for you because you're sick now, and hope for the best. It's just something I'm going to do a one-off. And then research is when I have a systematic plan. That worked really well for your strep. I want to do a study so I can see if it works well for a lot of resistant strep. So I'm going to make a research plan. It's going to be systematic. I'm going to have a hypothesis. I'm going to put it through IRB. That's the research where I want to have systematic research that has some verifiable results I can use moving forward. It also recommends a review board to protect human subjects. What is that now? IRB, and it identifies a comprehensive set of prescriptive judgments, which we'll go through now. So the first prescriptive judgment is respect for persons. We did not show respect for the men in the Tuskegee syphilis study. You know, part of the consequences of them not knowing they had syphilis was that then they gave it to their partners, who sometimes had children born with syphilis, and it had, large repercussions, which is another reason it's really important to tell people their diagnosis. So the Belmont Report, Respect for Persons, includes two separate moral requirements: the requirement to acknowledge autonomy and the requirement to protect those with diminished autonomy. When ethicists talk about autonomy, what do we mean? Who has autonomy? Sorry, I interrupted someone. Go ahead, shout it right out. The right to say no. That's someone with autonomy has the right to say no. What's the autonomy itself?
Comprehension. Don't we comprehend what's going on?
So certainly in order to have autonomy, you have to have comprehension. Autonomy is generally my ability to make decisions for my own self. And we assume all adults have it until proven otherwise. And this doesn't mean that, autonomy doesn't mean that I have to agree and think your decisions are awesome, but it means I need to respect that you're an adult who's making decisions for yourself, and because I respect that about you, I respect your decisions even if they're not the decisions I would make. And diminished autonomy is then someone who either is somewhat unable or wholly unable to make decisions for their own self. And autonomy is something only adults have. We'll talk about children later. You have to be 18 years old. You have to be in your right mind, be able to understand and make decisions in order to have autonomy. And so the application for that, when we say, oh, the Belmont report told us we need to have respect for persons, how are we going to show it? We're going to have informed consent. If I don't inform you, I'm not being very respectful of your ability to make decisions for yourself. Because I'm saying, sure, make a decision, but I'm not going to tell you information that is material to that decision. Beneficence is doing good for someone. So two general rules have been formulated as complementary expressions of beneficent actions: to do no harm and to maximize possible benefits and minimize possible harms. Again, this doesn't mean that if someone feels uncomfortable or gets hurt in research, that doesn't mean that you have not acted in a beneficent way, because sometimes that happens in research because we don't know what's going to happen. But to construct your research to minimize harm and maximize benefits. And so how we apply that is in our consent form by discussing harms versus benefits. Justice, I'm not going to read all of this, but part of how we show justice in research is how we choose research subjects. The gentleman in the back had talked about how Tuskegee was not just, and part of how Tuskegee was not just was in how the research subjects were chosen. I think it doesn't take a lot of creative thinking to think those men were chosen because they're not very sophisticated about the healthcare system, and they didn't have access to a lot of care without this medical team. So they were chosen for that reason, and that they were people who would easily say yes and not ask a lot of questions. So justice in subject selection is that we don't choose people just because they're simple to get to enroll, but at the same time we don't choose people just because they're here. That we need to choose a variety of people. Sometimes it's a problem that we say, oh, we'll give you $20 if you come enroll in our research, and then people for whom $20 is a big deal are going to appear. And then when our medication actually gets approved and used for the general population, those people who helped us develop it can't afford it. So that's not just. On the other hand, if we say, well, we don't want to do that seems really terrible. I'm going to only enroll medical students and physicians in my research. Is that just research? Why not? Go ahead.
You're forcing your students to enroll.
Well, what if I didn't force them? I just invited them. I said, hey, students, I'm doing some research, totally up to you, no harm, no foul, whatever.
But still at the back of the mind of the student, he might,
So still it might feel that to a student that I'm telling them I don't mind, but they want to impress me, and people love to impress. Or they think, I want to please the people in charge of me, so even though I'm not really interested, I'm going to say yes. Why else would only enrolling medical students and physicians not be just?
Well, they're going to be in a situation where they will be able to afford mental health care, so they would benefit directly, whereas the rest of the population might not.
So the comment was, well, they're in a position that they'll be able to afford this medication when it comes out, so it's not really an issue for them. So doesn't that make it more just? I'm testing it on them for use on them?
Not to the general public.
Well, because they have a particular social experience that might not bring about knowledge about whatever it is you're researching.
Okay, so the comment was they have a particular sort of set of social experiences, so it might not contribute fully to the kind of knowledge I want, because I'm getting people from sort of a similar educational attainment, sort of similar socioeconomic status, or at least going forward they probably will.
Are they actually going to benefit from that in the future? Like, if they are not the intended beneficiaries, then why should they be the subject in the first place?
If they're not the intended beneficiaries, why be the subjects? Because I need some subjects. What if I tell them, like, you're not going to benefit, but I would like you to be subjects anyway? If you were someone who was not say, a medical student or a physician, do you think, how would you feel about being left out of research? That we're saying, oh, look, you guys, you know, you don't have as high of education as us. Your future earnings are not as good. We're just not going to bother with you. We're saying to a bunch of people, we've already decided that it's not even worth it to bother with you. Because a lot of people want to participate in research. They say, want to contribute to the knowledge of the field. Maybe I have a family member who is afflicted with the disease you're studying, and to just say, like, look, this is only for people in this one status, feels unfair. I want to take part. I'm a smart person. I can give consent. So we have to be too careful if we're we need to not take advantage of people from sort of low socioeconomic or low educational status, but we also need to remember that those people have their own autonomy, and people want to participate in research for a variety of reasons, and if we decide ahead of time, like, nah, it's not for you, you're too hard, we have to have all these extra rules about not taking advantage of you, and it's just not worth it. That annoys people too. People want to participate in research. Who are you to make the decision for me? So subject selection, you need to make sure that you are selecting a variety of subjects and for a variety of not just of racial backgrounds, but also age, sex, life experience, not just, oh, this is only open to people who are able to drive to my lab from 2 to 4 on a weekday. Because again, that rules a lot of people out. It says, if you're someone who can't take 2 hours off of work in the middle of an afternoon, I don't care about you. You can't participate. And so that's another way that it's taking research away from people, but a very high echelon of people. This also becomes an issue when we talk about remuneration for subjects, in terms of, well, I realize that it's paid to come and do my research, so I'm gonna pay you for your time. And then there's often an ethical issue about what is the right amount to pay someone for their time. Because some people I saw say, I need you for 2 hours and I will give you $100, would be like, oh, that is way more than I'd make it work. And some people might say, I don't care. I'm just doing it for the research of it. Or if I said, I need you for an hour and I'll give you $5,000, then it gets to be like, well, that is more than a person's time is generally worth. So is that becoming coercive? When I was a student, I was offered extra credit. You talked about this earlier. I was offered extra credit to take part in a research study, and I will say that was a big inducement for me to take part in it. 'Cause I want extra credit. I want the professor to be impressed with me. So on the other hand, if you say, well, I don't want to coerce anyone, so I'm not going to give you any money if you take part in our research, again, that's going to leave out everyone who needs to catch a cab or needs to get a babysitter for 2 hours. So there's a lot to balance in terms of subject selection, and that's why when you put in your IRB application, you'll see they want to know what's your plan for selecting a variety of people for your subject, for your research. Any questions about subject selection? I know I've made it totally clear now. Yes, go ahead.
When it comes to paying your subjects,
Yes.
would it be reasonable in the informed consent if they ask, are we going to be paid, to say yes, but don't reveal what it is until after they have consented?
So the question is, let's say that you have an amount that you're going to pay your research subjects, and in the consent form you say, I will pay you for being in my research. However, you don't tell them how much you're going to pay until after they complete the research.
After they consent.
After they consent. I'm going to turn this around. What do people think? Is that a more ethical plan than telling them the amount of money?
You have to have respect for them and that the amount that you set, because you put time into it.
Okay, so we have one vote for it's not very respectful to not tell them the amount. Other thoughts? Yes.
Paying like a gift card, they're not just for, like, say, look at it as a benefit or compensation, but for paying the inconvenience of time involved in research. I mean, the time they have spent.
Right. So someone's brought up a point that it's not really, we're not paying people for being in research. The general opinion is that we don't do that. We're paying people for the inconvenience and the time. Your time is important. You had to somehow get here, either by cab or using gas from your car. You had to take time off of your work, or you had to get someone to watch the kids, or take time off your weekend, and that is all, we're all busy people, and so to show that we realize that that is a big inconvenience, we want to pay so you're not having to pay anything for having to be in this study. Yes, and I think it's generally frowned upon to say, I'm going to pay you for being in this study. We're going to pay you your costs. Or as a thank you gift, I'm going to give you a monogrammed UAMS mug just to show you I appreciate you and your commitment to research. So back to our question, what do we think? You do not get to know the amount until after you consent. Does that solve our concerns? Does that make them less concerning? I see people shaking their heads. Does anyone else want to say words about it?
You don't have all the information to consent.
Okay, you don't have full information to consent. We're saying,
You have to trust that they know how much your time is worth, and then you have to consent. And then if you have to make a decision about how much time, what is it gonna take for me to come to your research study and do it, everything that you're asking me for, I need to know, if you're saying you're compensating me, I need to know what that is so I can decide if I'm happy with that.
so the comments are, that's not giving your potential subjects the full information. It's saying, here's the risks, benefits, alternatives, but there's going to be payment. It might be $1. It might be $5,000. We're not going to tell you. And that for some people, deciding if their time is worth it, the inconvenience is worth it, they need to know how much money it's going to be.
Okay, we do have an online
Oh,
comment.
awesome.
It says, I don't think that allows informed consent, to leave that out.
Okay, so that's sort of similar to what we heard just now. It's not respecting that you can have all the full information. Plus, let's say that we do that. There's going to be like, you're going to have a really fancy consent. It's going to be a scratch off at the bottom. I don't know, because that would be fun for me. You have signed, and now you're going to scratch off, and it's going to say, your money is $7.50. Do you have to participate in the research now because you have done the scratch off? No. No, because why not? You can withdraw at any time you're a volunteer. So I tend to agree that I don't think this will solve any of our problems, because if we're going to give people payment, there's a variety of reasons we give them payment, and part of why we tell them the payment is because that's material fact to help them decide. If they're a little on the, does it help some people? Does it convince some people? It probably does. Am I concerned about that? Kind of. But a lot of things convince people, and we need to try to be as just as possible, but we can't say, well, 3% of why you enrolled was because you wanted the money. Certainly more than 3% of why I enrolled as an undergrad was because I wanted the extra credit. There's a lot of discussion, especially who took Psych 101 and enrolled in research to get extra credit. Okay, I'm seeing I was not the only one who did that. There's been a lot written about this because it's like part of Psych 101. Would you like an extra point? Come and do this. And I had to listen to, like, it sounded like whoosh, and you had to, like, there was a word in the middle, and you had to, like, it was not harmful to me, but totally like 100% of why I signed up was for the extra credit. And was that coercive? I mean, it didn't hurt me. It took a half hour out of my life. But did I do it because I was trying to contribute to research, because I cared about the state of science? No, not at all. So, on the other hand, if it didn't hurt me and I was a grown-up human, even though I was a college student and maybe not the brightest, if they told me, here's the risks, which were like, I don't know, you might get your hair might get mussed down from wearing the earphones. And I knew the risks and benefits, and I agreed, because they wanted me, I wanted extra credit. I don't know. I said yes. I was going to say I wasn't coerced, but I was totally coerced, but I still said yes.
How come flyers and advertisements can't specify the amount of compensation?
I'm not sure that they can't. I think they generally don't, because they want people to call and have like an actual interest in learning about the study. I don't think there's an actual rule that says you cannot put the amount of compensation on the flyer. I think there's concern if you say, who wants $2,000, that you're going to have to do a lot of screening out. Where if you say, do you have, I don't know, a history of recurrent earwax, that more people will be like, well, I do have that terrible earwax problem. I'll give them a call. Other comments, questions, grievances? So now we're going to get, oh, sorry. You're so polite, I don't always see you. Always shout out if I don't.
It's better not to mention, even though you're intending to give a gift card at the end, it's better not to include it in the form.
Oh, no, you need to include it in the conform. The question was, is it better not to mention the gift card in the informed consent? And I said, you should mention it in the informed consent, because again, that's part of how I'm going to make the decision. It's maybe you don't approve that that's of how I'm going to make the decision, but guess what? It is. And so that's a fact that I need. And it might be just because, I don't know, it's a 3-day weekend and I want to live large, or it might be because I need to get an Uber, and if you don't pay me at least $20, that won't cover my Uber. For all of those, it's a material fact that's important to me in my decision, so you need to tell it to me before I consent. Absolutely. It doesn't, we were talking about, does it need to go on the flyer that you see in the elevator? No, it does not. Is it wrong to include it? No, it's not wrong either. I think sometimes they don't, because you want people who are genuinely interested to hopefully call and go through screening. Other questions? If you don't see me looking for you because I'm used to people being rude like me and just shouting something out, go ahead and either shout it out or say, hey, Leah, you're not seeing my politeness. Anyhow, so now we're moving to the common rule. The common rule, when we talk about research regs, these are the regs. What's in the, the NIH wants us to talk about, the rules of Code of Federal Regulations, that is the common rule. It applies to research on human subjects. If you're an animal researcher, this does not apply. Then you have your own set of regs. There are exemptions right now, and of course, after the change in the common rule in January, there will be extra exemptions. That's one of the things that is changing. Right now, exemptions include certain forms of educational research. If you're researching on publicly available collective data, if you're doing something for public service or benefit, or food tasting and safety, please don't ask me follow-ups about food tasting and safety. I don't know about it, but it's exempt. So what is research? When I was talking to you earlier, research is a systematic investigation, which includes, I'm going to have a research development, testing, evaluation that's going to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. So again, systematic investigation, generalizable knowledge. It's different from, I'm going to try this one thing on you because regular treatment didn't work and you're really sick right now. That's experimental use. And human subject is a living individual. So again, this is not about if you're doing post-mortem research, that is not human subjects. And it's about whom an investigator is conducting research, and you have to obtain data through intervention or interaction with the individual or identifiable private information. Sometimes in IRB we see people wanting a waiver of consent. And one of the reasons is because the only identifiable private information we might get is in order to get a consent form from them. So sometimes we'll give people a waiver for that reason. So you have to both, I'm collecting data about a living person, and I'm getting identifiable private information, things like your social security number, your name and address, your birthday. Those are the things that make this human subjects research, and we have to apply the common rule. Questions? Looking at everyone. Okay. So there's 4 main subjects. There's human subjects research in IRBs, And then there's all of our vulnerable subjects, which are pregnant women, fetuses, neonates, prisoners, and children. I meant to ask you who you felt was vulnerable before I told you, but I messed that up. So these are our vulnerable populations. These are all of them. Do you agree? My first question is, do you agree these are vulnerable populations? And then my follow-up question is, are there others that should be included who are vulnerable research populations? So do you agree with pregnant women, prisoners, and children? Children also includes neonates. Yes. Okay, everyone agrees? Anyone want to disagree for fun? My background's in law, so I'm used to people who like to disagree for fun. Sometimes I have people disagree who talk about just because I'm pregnant does not mean I need special care for me, that if I want to be in research, I should be allowed to.
Some people might also agree that fetuses don't have autonomy yet, or any kind of individualism, depending on where you are on that side. What are you against?
Right. So the point was, some people think fetuses also are not, they of course don't have autonomy because they're not 18, but that they're not sort of their own being who should get special protection aside from the pregnant women. So that's sort of related to pregnant women and whether or not we allow pregnant women to enroll in any old research that they would like to. We also, it's come up several times that sometimes prisoners are very annoyed about being excluded from research. At UAMS, we don't allow prisoners in any research which isn't specific to the prisoner population. You can't be a prisoner and take part in a study about myeloma or something like that. You can only take part in studies that are about, say, people who've just gotten out of prison, or, diabetes management in prison. And that sometimes causes issues, they call ethics, about the fact that we don't allow prisoners in generalized research.
Is it just, does it fall into that category?
Right. So what would be the reasons for allowing prisoners in all of our general adult research? What are some reasons for?
They might be part of a population that you were interested in researching.
They might be part of a population I'm interested in researching. What else? They might be people who are interested in being in my research too. Sometimes people take part in research because they think it might help them. Talk about that more later too. What are reasons not to allow prisoners?
Maybe violent.
They may be violent. Regular humans might be violent. But yes, what else? They live in controlled environments, and say more about that. Why is that a concern?
Because, they could be exposed or not exposed to something that somebody on the outside could do.
So their experiences are not always something that you can generalize to people who are not in prison, because they don't get out in the same ways that the rest of us do. They might be exposed to more of certain viruses, less of other viruses. What are things that make us concerned that we have extra protection for people? What are our concerns? I'm not asking that well. Talk about consent for prisoners. What would be our concerns about that? Coercion. Either that, you're in prison all day, you think, I'm willing to do anything to get out of here for an hour. I don't really care what you're asking of me. Guard Bob is really interested in getting people to enroll in the research, and I do not want him angry at me because he's very large. And so there can be coercion in a variety of ways. What other groups would you, if you were rewriting the Common Rule, who do you think should be subject to extra protection in research? Okay, people who are very ill.
Or mentally ill.
mentally ill. Okay.
Not make decisions for themselves.
Okay, people who can't make decisions for themselves, those people are already, they aren't under, special populations, because if you can't make decisions for yourself, you're not consenting for yourself in general.
Well, what about students and employees?
Students and employees, we've talked before about my exciting research past, where I was totally enrolled because I was a student. Employees, I think the same thing can happen. You know, we know in labs sometimes like, oh, we need one more person to be a normal subject. Come on, just, you don't really feel like, no, I'm not into that before. Okay, we have something from the online.
Someone said the elderly.
The elderly, okay, good. Of course, the elderly, some of them are going to disagree, but I think it's good to think about, like, who might be more vulnerable. Something that comes up a lot when I ask this question is people in the military. They're also in their own kind of controlled environment. Other thoughts? I think it's good to think about when you go to have your subject selection. Are these people who are able to be influenced easily for a variety of reasons? And are we sure that we are minimizing our influence of them and not taking advantage of that fact? All right, so let's talk about the support trial. I should be at a stopping point soon. So questional consent. This is a neonatal oxygenation study. So people who've had a baby and the baby is early or has some problems, and they're looking at the oxygenation. So they study the retinopathy of prematurity, which happens a lot when tiny newborns are on oxygen, that they lose their vision. They get this retinopathy, which sometimes makes them blind. So it has 2 arms of oxygen saturation monitoring. They're either going to keep oxygen saturations of these neonates between 85 and 89%, or between 91 and 95%. And the support investigators, they say, like, to the parents who are consenting, these are both within normal range. Normal range is 85 to 95. We're going to keep them in there. That's a standard of practice. So they use standard of care, but telling them it's standard of care, it masks the fact that deciding whether your particular baby is going to be at the low end or the high end of this standard range is going to be not determined by us and seeing how the baby's doing, but by where they are in the research protocol. So the Office of Human Research Protection found that this study was guilty of non-compliance with regard to risk and benefit disclosure, even though we couldn't know the research-related risks ahead of time. That they should have told families, like, look, this is going to be decided by research, not clinical practice, but we don't know which one is actually better or actually worse. All right, the cartoon means we have arrived at our first break. So let's all take like until 1:15 to stretch our legs, get some caffeine, things like that.